Love, love, love till I be but breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome to the Spirit of Life program. My name is Lucia Pace, and today my guest is Anne Lastman, who was with me last week, and she's going to be talking to us about her book, Redeeming Grief. She's also an abortion and grief counsellor, and now also thinking of training, doing short courses for counsellors.
Hello, Lucia. We're back again.
Welcome back, Anne. Thank you for coming back. And last week we left off on the note of currently you're writing a course, if you like, a little booklet.
I have written it.
10 points.
It's completed.
Yeah,
Yep.
you've written it.
Yeah.
And that's to do with training qualified counsellors. Okay.
It's called A Time to Recover.
A Time to Recover. Yes.
It's for already qualified counsellors, psychologists, or anyone who's interested. It's not for the hands of volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
Because we live in such litigious times,
Mm-hmm.
it has to be someone who's qualified. And in it, I have 10 steps, 10 ways of seeing that they can learn to recognise symptoms of post-abortion grief, because the counsellor may not be thinking that an abortion 7 years ago has affected her client, or an abortion 30 years ago has left its mark. So what I've done in this booklet is 10 different ideas what to look for, and the importance, I speak about the importance of forgiveness. Every counsellor must speak about forgiveness. Even if they don't have a religious belief, that's fine. You don't have to have a religious belief. But the abortive woman needs to at least be able to forgive herself.
Yes.
Because even if she doesn't believe in a God, that's okay, but she has to forgive herself for a decision she made, perhaps in haste, or she thought was
Lack of
good
information.
at the time. At the time it was good, but it turned out to be not so good. So the counsellor has to help her learn how to forgive herself very slowly. Mm-hmm. And towards the end of this booklet, A Time to Recover, I have set out 3 saying goodbye, letting go of rituals, if you will. There's a Catholic one, a Baptist one, and a non-religious one. And saying goodbye is severing that invisible umbilical cord that we spoke about. Saying goodbye is very, very important, because when someone we love dies, we say goodbye to them, don't we? We have funerals, even with miscarriages, there are people around to grieve and to, in a way, say goodbye to this baby. But not for abortion.
What are the common symptoms of grief?
In what way?
Grief
what do you
itself. What does a grief sufferer experience? What does it look like?
Okay, there's many types of grief. There's complicated type of grief which goes on and on. There's disenfranchised type of grief. Now this is where abortion comes in under disenfranchised grief. Now this means that it's a grief that someone experiences, but society doesn't say it exists. That's it. There's a book on it called Disenfranchised Grief by Professor Kenneth Doker, and it's a really good book. And in it, it speaks about the grief of, for example, a homosexual partner who loses his partner or her partner. Society doesn't accept that grief, or so far, until recently it hasn't accepted, but it's being seen as that it's a real grief. Abortion is a grief. There's a grief involved because it's a hidden grief. Only usually the woman, occasionally the male, not always the male, and maybe someone else knows. And she has no one to go to, very often no one to go to. And the friends who advised at the time that it was a good thing to have an abortion, after a while sort of say, get a life, get over it, you made your decision, get over it now. Grief manifests in many ways, but usually in self-destructive manners. There are various types, but this one comes under the banner of both complicated, because they can't move from it, and complicated grief is there's a lot of writing and it's very, very hard recognised, and disenfranchised grief, yes.
So for the sufferer, they don't get much validation in their experience of it.
Yeah. And what I do, is that we begin validation of her life first, because at the time of the abortion, her humanity was messed up. Her femininity was messed up. We restore that, and then we restore the humanity of the baby. That's the important thing, the humanity of the baby.
And last week you mentioned that in your findings, and I think in other research as well, documented research, there's a finding that sexual abuse is often connected to abortion,
multiple abortions.
Yes. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How you've discovered that? Yeah.
This is, for me, anecdotal evidence from my office. Now, I've seen over 17 years, I would say, over 1,500 women, plus some males, okay? And this is where I first came across it many years ago with someone saying, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. No, they're not babies. They're not babies.
Right.
They're not babies.
So it's a form of denial.
It's all completely denial.
Right.
Yes.
We just need to go to a break.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll see you back straight after the break. Welcome back. My guest today is Anne Lastman, author and abortion grief counsellor. Anne, I'm interested to know, we ended on the denial issue before the break. Does the person consciously go into denial, do you think?
I think it begins from when the abuse happens, that it's not happening. There's disassociation.
Is it a coping mechanism?
Especially if the abuse was happening as a child. A child, say for example, of 8, 10 years old, doesn't have the coping skills to deal with sexual abuse, so they call it different names. They file it in a different file. It doesn't happen. And maybe if the abuser was within a loved member of the family, a father, grandfather, brother, even female, it's too hard for a child to cope with that. So the denial is a coping mechanism in order for that person, the child, and then later the teenager, later the adult, to be able to live and cope. Now, how do I cope with it? When I hear someone saying, Anne, I've had 7, 10 abortions, I don't go into the abortion. I'd say, that's interesting, but can we leave this for now? Because I really would like to get to know you. I would like to get to know your early life, please. Let me into your life, and then we will see where we go with that. What I'm trying to do is listen for members of the family and listen for things that happened and listen for...
And can I ask you, the things that you say you look for, can you give us some idea of what those things are?
Lucia, when someone comes to me and says, I've had multiple abortions of whatever, anything over 4 maybe, and upwards, my radar goes off. And I know that there's something else happening.
Yes.
Or something has happened in this person's life and is expressing it this way. I encountered this many years ago with one person having 11 abortions, and she didn't recognize the abortion. She didn't come to me for grief counseling for abortion. She came to me for grief counseling for 2 miscarriages. The miscarriages she acknowledged, but the abortion she didn't, and that intrigued me. And I realized, in fact, she even said she had no control over the miscarriages. That said to me that she's a person who needs to be in control, because at some point in her life she didn't have control. And so I said to her, and realizing that, I started by saying, I'll call her Mary, it's a generic name, okay? So it makes it easy. Tell me a little bit about your story. Tell me a little bit about your early life. Let's see why it is you have a need to keep aborting and to be in control. And she started telling me a colourful early life and a babysitter who was sexually abusing her under threat, and she couldn't tell anybody. And from then on, she couldn't stand. She had to be in control of her body. The miscarriages she couldn't control, but the rest she could control.
So by aborting her babies, what was she controlling?
She was cutting out, according to her words, bits of men. And I believe, this is my opinion, Anne's opinion, that she was punishing herself.
A form of revenge too, I guess.
She's punishing herself for not telling when she should have told of what was going on. Even though she was a little person and couldn't and was fearful. And that's my job. Now this is where my job comes in, and it's beautiful, because I start and slowly reframe her story for her, with her help, to see herself standing from the vantage point of an adult, and reframe that story of a little girl who was courageous, who defended her family if they were under threat, who is a good person and not a bad person, and doesn't have to cut bits of people out, because she's cutting out bits of her own body, and it leaves her very empty. So my job is to begin, really ultimately, it's to begin to reframe a trauma, wherever I find that trauma, and reframe it from the vantage point of today. And also to be able to see that it was a child who processes a trauma differently, because they don't have the vocabulary or knowledge. So they process and store as a memory only with the limited knowledge and language that they have. But today it's an adult. This is why very often we'll find sexually abused adults very infantile in their emotional life, because they've stored as very youthful, as very young, emotional stuff as very young. But in the body has grown, the intellect has grown, but the emotion is still stuck.
Right. And I'm very interested in you talking to us a little bit about trauma. You've done quite a bit of study on trauma.
About 150 hours, that's all. Not
so
much.
We're going to go to a break, and perhaps we'll take it up on that point when we come back. Is that okay?
All right.
We'll see you back straight after the break.
Lord, till I be but breath of thy Spirit flowing in me. Lord, Lord, till I be but breath of thy Spirit flowing in me.
Welcome back. My guest today is Anne Lastman, who's a post-abortion grief counsellor as well as an author of one book and one to come.
We're back again.
Yes, we're back again. And interested in talking or hearing about your learnings or findings on trauma, that word trauma.
Mm-hmm. The simplest way of explaining trauma is that it's an event which overwhelms all of a person's coping mechanisms. The person's coping mechanisms aren't enough, and it overwhelms. Now, the results of trauma are many and varied, and behaviours change. The worldview of someone who's experienced a severe trauma is never the same. I could say that my worldview, the day I was diagnosed and given the diagnosis of breast cancer last August, my worldview changed. It's not the same anymore. Trauma, and it did overwhelm me. In fact, it overwhelmed me so much, and I should have recognised it because, I worked in trauma for so long, but I could see myself slipping out of me because I couldn't cope with the diagnosis that was being read out to me. Trauma, in the simplest terms, is the overwhelming of a person's own coping mechanisms.
Yes. So it's a form of, when you say stepping out of you,
Yeah.
it's a form of a dissociation.
It's a disassociation.
And disownership of what is happening, not
Yes.
wanting to be part of it.
That's right.
Yes.
A
form of escape.
It's an escape, and this happens a lot with children, where especially as they're being abused. Disassociation is a way of, I've heard it being called a happy place. I used to go to my happy place. I had friends there, and I had a happy family there. It was a beautiful place. That's a happy place. A child who's being sexually abused at home, and I'm writing a book at the moment on that. It's nearly, as I said, it's nearly finished. Usually leaves her body so as not to be present.
Not to be part of it.
Not to be a part of it.
Yes.
Trauma, and trauma, when it's very severe, changes everything and leaves a deep imprint.
Yes. And it interferes with a person's free will of choice, because it's an imposition, isn't it? It's an imposed situation where you have no control.
That's right.
Yeah.
Also, it imprints in the person's psyche a new file, if you will, called trauma. So future traumas
Events,
will go directly to that file, and the more trauma events that there are, the bigger the file gets, and the more effects the person will feel.
So what happens then? Is it the defence mechanism that comes forth to defend?
It is a defence. Disassociation is a defence mechanism.
Yes.
It comes out to protect us from our own self, where we could not survive.
So it's a coping mechanism.
Skill. Yes, it's a coping
and really
mechanism.
needed.
Yes.
I would imagine.
This is why also, for example, girls who go and have an abortion and put it away and call it a curectomy, and others call it different things. It's not important. It's put it away, but they don't. Put it away to deal with it for a later time. and being too long on the back burner, that in itself causes a lot of problems. That book, this book that I've here, actually this is, I don't know if you can see it that way.
Redeeming Grief?
Yep.
Yeah.
I wrote this, it's a second edition. The reason I wrote about it was because I wanted to add in the new information on my take on sexual abuse and multiple abortions. There's a chapter on that, and also the new Coleman studies, Professor Priscilla Coleman, this latest 2011 study, which showed amazing results and how harmful abortion is, how harmful it increases the risk of suicides by, I don't know, about 200%. Substance abuse is some 155%.
Self-harm.
So all of these have this latest study. She did a meta-analysis of over 800 women involved in this study.
So it's almost, and I don't know if I'm right about this, this is just a thought I'm having while you talk, it's almost like a desire for death. It's almost like a repetitive pattern of wanting to die yourself.
Yes.
Because you've killed.
It's a self-punishment.
Without realising.
It's a self-punishment regime that we script ourselves.
Yes.
It's because out there you might, I'm always amazed at those groups of pro-life, pro-abortionists. If they were really okay with abortion, they wouldn't have to make so much noise. They wouldn't.
They would just be and accept.
Do it. You want to have an abortion, go and do it. And no one's stopping you. I'm not going to come to your home and stop you from having an abortion.
Yeah.
But so why does there need to be such loud noise? And my suspicion about that is that's their way of coping with what they've done.
Possibly, yes. In some cases, yes.
Yes. It doesn't have to be all of them,
no.
but it's
also taking a form of maybe control back in their life too, having the control to do whatever they want or think they need to do. But Anne, I'm just interested, we're running short of time, almost at the end of our program.
Okay.
I'm really interested in just snippets of key points that you've written about in Redeeming Grief.
Well, there's a million. I've written about the abortion and how it affects the family. Now, it's very destructive.
Yes.
Okay? When a man and a woman take an abortion into their family, they begin on a negative.
Right, okay.
There's all sorts
So it has a destructive outcome and consequences.
And when within the marriage itself.
Yep, we've come to the end of our program. I'm sorry I need to cut you short, but it's been my pleasure to have you here, Anne, and always enlightening to speak to you. Thank you.
We'll do it again.
Yes, indeed.
All right.
You've been watching the Spirit of Life program. Please tune in again next week.
Bring it to birth and blow where you will. Blow, blow, blow till I be but breath of the Spirit.